At 80 years old, Henry Caldwell sat quietly on the porch of his small cabin, nestled in the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina. The early morning mist clung to the trees like a fading memory, and Henry's eyes, though aged, still held the spark of a man who had seen too much and learned even more. He wasn't always this wise, nor this peaceful. There were decades of chaos, heartache, and misguided choices that paved the road to his present self. If he could turn back time and sit across from his 50-year-old self, a version of him still chasing success, sleepless nights, and shallow validation, he would have plenty to say. Not in anger, but with quiet urgency. "Slow down," he'd whisper. "It's not all about the next big thing." This isn't just Henry's story. It's a reflection of what age teaches us when we're willing to listen. It's a message for anyone who's ever felt behind, uncertain, or stuck, especially those standing at the crossroads of midlife. Because sometimes the answers don't come from gurus or books. They come from an old man on a porch, holding decades of hard-earned wisdom, offering it to a world moving too fast to notice. Henry Caldwell was 53 when everything began to shift, not with a dramatic event or a sudden tragedy, but in the quiet realization that he no longer felt like himself. Life had become a blur of routines and responsibilities, but none of it felt meaningful. His days were filled with meetings, mindless scrolling, and conversations that drained him. He was surrounded by people but felt utterly alone. One morning he sat in traffic for over an hour just to get to a job he didn't care about, working with people he couldn't trust, doing things that made no difference. That evening, after collapsing onto his couch with a drink in hand, something inside him snapped. Not in anger, but in surrender. He turned off the TV mid-show, set the glass down, and just sat there, in silence. That silence, he'd later say, was the most uncomfortable and most honest moment of his adult life. For the first time in decades, there was no distraction, no background noise, just his thoughts, his regrets, and the unshakable question, is this all there is? The turning point wasn't glamorous. It came in small, stubborn steps. He deleted social media apps. He canceled dinners with people who made him feel small. He started taking long walks in the early morning hours, just listening to birds and letting his mind breathe. And most of all, he began writing, pages and pages of his thoughts, fears, and desires. He stopped chasing productivity and began chasing presence. Henry learned that being bored without distraction was a superpower in the modern world. He started seeing clearly who brought light into his life and who quietly drained it. He realized that worrying never changed an outcome, but it always stole his peace. That sleep wasn't laziness, it was a miracle drug. That food was either healing his body or poisoning it. That silence could be a sanctuary, not a punishment. And so slowly, his life took a different shape. He traded urgency for stillness, chose depth over speed, started each day by doing the hardest thing first, what he called eating the frog. He saved more, listened more, forgave more. He didn't try to be perfect. He just tried to be honest, with himself and with others. Henry wasn't trying to escape his past. He was trying to stop repeating it. The turning point wasn't a midlife crisis. It was a midlife awakening, a decision to stop numbing and start noticing. If he could give one piece of advice to someone in their 50s, it would be this. Don't wait until you're 80 to live with intention. You don't need a breakdown to begin a breakthrough. 3 years into his quiet transformation, Henry Caldwell thought he had found balance, until a phone call shattered his newfound peace. It was a rainy Wednesday afternoon when the hospital called. His best friend of 40 years, Walter Briggs, had collapsed from a stroke. Walter was the kind of man who lit up a room without trying, always full of laughter and plans for tomorrow. But now tomorrow wasn't promised. Henry drove 2 hours in silence, the windshield wipers swaying to the rhythm of his memories. He remembered the wild camping trips, late-night poker games, and the pact they once made. We'll grow old, sit by the lake, and curse the world together. But now Walter lay in a sterile hospital bed, motionless, unrecognizable. The moment Henry walked into the room, he felt it. Mortality, not as a concept, but as a presence. And with it came a deep, unrelenting guilt. He hadn't spoken to Walter in 6 months. Life had gotten busy. Schedules, errands, trivial distractions, all had stolen time he would never get back. He held his friend's cold hand and whispered, "I'm sorry. I thought we had more time." That night, Henry didn't sleep. He sat at the edge of the hospital cot, watching machines breathe for a man who once ran marathons and carried his whole world with ease. And in that sleepless vigil, something cracked wide open inside him. He realized that even with all his recent growth, he'd missed the most important lesson of all: cherishing the present with the people who matter most. When Walter passed away a few days later, Henry didn't cry at the funeral. He cried on the drive home when he passed the diner they always stopped at, when he heard an old blues song on the radio that they used to dance to while grilling steaks in the backyard. Loss has a cruel way of making you see clearly, and for Henry that clarity hit like lightning. He made a new vow, not just to live better, but to love louder, to call friends without a reason, to send letters, not texts, to spend time, not just money. He stopped waiting for holidays to reconnect. He visited people. He forgave faster. The unexpected loss of his best friend taught Henry something he couldn't find in books or podcasts. Life isn't just short, it's unpredictable. And the people you love won't always be around when you're finally ready to show up. So he showed up, every day, not perfectly, but intentionally, because he knew now, painfully so, that relationships aren't built in grand gestures, but in the quiet, consistent moments we often take for granted until they're gone. After Walter's passing, Henry Caldwell found himself viewing the world through an entirely different lens. What once seemed urgent now felt irrelevant. The opinions of others, the relentless pursuit of productivity, the constant noise of the world, it all faded into the background. For the first time in decades, he allowed silence to stretch. He embraced stillness not as laziness, but as clarity. Instead of waking up and reaching for his phone, he began each day with a cup of black coffee in the rising sun. No notifications, no headlines. Just the wind, the birds, and the whisper of his own thoughts. Henry began questioning everything he once believed was normal. Why do we rush to retire without learning how to live? Why do we wait for sickness to appreciate health? Why do we seek approval from people we wouldn't trade places with? He started measuring his wealth in memories, not money. He no longer chased a better life. He defined his own version of it. It wasn't a bigger house or a newer car. It was being able to dance barefoot in the kitchen with his granddaughter. It was the joy of fixing up an old motorcycle in his garage. It was hosting slow dinners with friends where no one looked at a screen. And the more he detached from the expectations of the world, the more peace he found within himself. He forgave his parents, not because they asked for it, but because carrying resentment had become too heavy. He forgave himself for the years he spent chasing things that never mattered. and he began speaking to himself the way he wished others had, kindly, patiently, with grace. Henry's relationship with time also changed. He stopped saying someday. He took the trip. He picked up the guitar again. He started painting badly but joyfully. He read books not to impress anyone, but to feed his curiosity. He even started mentoring younger men in his town, men who were, like he once was, lost in the chaos of midlife. And to each of them he said, "You don't have to wait for a tragedy to wake up. You can choose to live differently right now." What changed wasn't the world, it was how he looked at it. He no longer feared aging. He honored it. He wore his wrinkles like medals. He spoke slower, listened deeper, and loved more openly. The need to be right disappeared, replaced by the desire to understand. The need to be seen faded, replaced by a commitment to see others fully. Henry didn't become a different man. He became the man he was always meant to be. Not perfect, but present. Not loud, but grounded. Not admired by all, but deeply loved by a few. And that, to him, was everything. One crisp October morning, Henry Caldwell received an unexpected letter in the mail. It wasn't from a bank, a doctor, or an old friend. It was from a local community center asking if he'd be willing to speak to a group of men over 50 about life, legacy, and longevity. He chuckled at first. "What do I know?" he muttered, sipping his coffee, but something inside nudged him. "You've lived through things they haven't yet." And so, he said yes. That evening, Henry stood in front of a small group of 20 men in folding chairs. Some were recently divorced, others recently retired. A few looked completely lost. But when he began to speak, the room fell silent. Not because he shouted or told them what to do, but because he shared the truth. The kind of raw, vulnerable, lived-in wisdom you can't find in a motivational book. He told them how fear of judgment had robbed him of years, how he let the wrong voices steer his choices, how he used busyness as a shield to avoid real connection. Then he told them how everything changed. He spoke about choosing a partner not for appearance, but for shared values. About building a life rooted in peace, not performance. About the small wins, like walking in nature, sleeping 8 hours, making one good meal, that quietly built a meaningful life. As he spoke, he noticed heads nodding, eyes watering, and when he finished, no one clapped. They just sat there, processing, feeling seen. That night sparked something unexpected. Within weeks, Henry was speaking at more community events, then at local churches, then on a podcast. Not as a guru, but as a guide. His story wasn't perfect. That's what made it powerful. And from that one opportunity came many more. Not for fame, but for impact. He began writing a book. Not a bestseller, but a legacy for his grandchildren. He started hosting Sunday morning coffee gatherings at his home, where people could talk about life without judgment. He even created a small garden project with local teens, teaching them not just about soil and sunlight, but about showing up, taking responsibility, and being present. Henry realized that the most powerful opportunities in life don't always look like doors flying open. Sometimes they look like a handwritten letter, a quiet nudge, a moment of being asked, "Would you share what you've learned?" And that's the thing about new opportunities. They rarely come when you're chasing them. They come when you've made space, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, to receive them. Henry didn't reinvent himself. He simply made peace with his past and turned his pain into purpose. The version of Henry Caldwell that emerged in his late 70s was unrecognizable to those who had known him in his 40s and 50s. Back then, he was rigid, reactive, and constantly reaching for the next achievement. Now he walked slower, breathed deeper, and responded to life with the calm of a man who had wrestled with chaos and won. Growth, he realized, isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself with milestones or medals. It sneaks in quietly, in the way you no longer need to be right in a conversation, in how you sit with discomfort rather than escape it, in the way you listen to someone without waiting to speak. Henry had become a man of stillness, of presence. But he wasn't passive. He was purposeful. He exercised daily, not to look a certain way, but to honor the machine that had carried him through decades of storms. He read voraciously, not for prestige, but for nourishment. He invested in younger men, not with money, but with mentorship. His home became a haven, not just for himself, but for others. On weekends, the sound of laughter and slow jazz drifted through the air as neighbors and friends gathered on his porch. Some came for advice. Others came just to sit beside him and feel safe. He began practicing a personal rule. Nothing fake survives here. No fake relationships, no fake smiles, no fake busyness. Only what was real, raw, and respectful. He noticed that as he grew, his circle changed. Some people drifted away, not because of conflict, but because they no longer matched his peace. And that was okay. Growth, he learned, often means grieving who you used to be and letting go of who no longer grows with you. He no longer argued to be understood. He no longer sacrificed his well-being for appearances. He said no more often and thank you even more. But perhaps the greatest sign of Henry's growth was in how he handled pain. When his joints ached, he stretched. When friends passed away, he honored them in stories. When he made mistakes, he forgave himself faster. He didn't avoid the hard parts of life. He walked straight into them, with open eyes and a willing heart. And in doing so, he became softer. Not weaker, softer. The kind of softness that only comes from deep strength. The kind that welcomes people home to themselves. By 80, Henry was no longer searching. He was sharing, no longer proving. He was pouring, no longer afraid. He was anchored. And the beautiful irony, all those years he spent trying to make something of himself, he finally became someone worth being by letting go of who he thought he had to be. The sun was setting behind the hills of Asheville when Henry Caldwell sat in his old rocking chair, a soft breeze rolling through the porch screens. In his lap was a worn leather journal, the same one he started the day Walter died. On the last page, he wrote 7 words in neat cursive, "This life, it was worth the work." Henry didn't mean just the physical labor or the years spent building a career. He meant the inner work, the healing, the unlearning, the letting go, the forgiving. The kind of work you don't get applause for, but that transforms you from the inside out. He looked around at the world he had crafted, not out of wealth, but out of intention. His home was modest, but it overflowed with warmth. Photographs lined the mantel, his late wife dancing barefoot in the kitchen, his grandchildren fishing by the lake, smiling neighbors at Sunday potlucks. The man who once chased success now cherished simplicity. The man who once feared growing old now called it a privilege. And what was once regret had turned into fuel for connection, for compassion, for contribution. Henry's story wasn't special in the sense of fame or fortune, but that's what made it so powerful. Because in every viewer watching his journey, in every man or woman sitting silently with their own doubts, fears, or regrets, there lived the possibility of starting over. Not by moving somewhere new, not by changing careers, not by reinventing yourself overnight, but by choosing presence over performance, peace over perfection, depth over distractions. He wanted people to understand that your past doesn't define you, it prepares you, that every mistake is a lesson and every loss holds a hidden gift, that it's never too late to turn your life into something beautiful. And as the stars began to blink above the treetops, Henry leaned back and smiled. Not because everything had turned out perfectly, but because he had finally made peace with the parts that didn't. He had loved deeply. He had failed honestly. He had grown deliberately. And most of all, he had lived awake. So if you're watching this and wondering if it's too late, it's not. Whether you're 50, 60, or 70, there is still time. Time to speak the apology, time to take the trip, time to start the book, time to forgive yourself, time to stop surviving and start living. Because one day, you too will be 80. And when you look back, may you whisper the same words as Henry did. This life, it was worth the work. What Henry Caldwell's journey teaches us is simple, yet profound. The greatest investment you'll ever make is in your awareness. Awareness of your time, your energy, your relationships, and most importantly, your values. We spend so much of our lives chasing things that don't bring peace, impressing people who don't matter, and ignoring our own quiet inner voice. But wisdom doesn't come from age alone. It comes from reflection, intention, and the courage to choose differently. It's never too late to start over. Never too late to walk away from noise and toward purpose. Never too late to stop proving and start living. Life isn't about perfection or performance. It's about showing up with presence. And in the end, we don't remember the money made, the emails sent, or the promotions earned. We remember moments, quiet, imperfect, genuine moments. That's where the meaning lives. Take 30 minutes this week, alone, without your phone. Sit outside. Bring a pen and paper. Ask yourself 3 questions. 1, what am I chasing right now? 2, who or what truly brings me peace? 3, what can I let go of to be more present? Then act. Call that friend. Forgive that mistake. Cancel that draining obligation. You don't need to change everything overnight. You just need to begin. Like Henry, your path forward doesn't require a perfect plan, only a willing heart. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this, please like and share with your friends. Your support keeps these stories alive. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a new episode. And if today's story touched your heart, leave a comment. I'd love to hear from you. Take care, stay well, and see you in the next story.